Chapter 5. Tian Yuan Continent. Sister Honghua, Sister Dongmei, thank you for your troubles. Looking at the 18-year-old girls, Gian Chen thanked the two quietly. These two maids were the servants of the Chongyang family and were specifically meant to cater to the everyday needs of Gian Chen. Since Gian Chen was always by himself in his room, his mother Yuntian had hired two servant girls to wait upon him. Hearing Gian Chen, the two girls laughed sweetly and then said, "Fourth master, by all means, don't be so polite. We are just doing what we are supposed to do." "That's right, fourth master, please refrain from being so courteous in the future. If the elders hear about the treatment you're giving us, then we may be penalized harshly," the other servant girl had said. Gian Chen smiled. "Don't worry, I wouldn't talk like this if others were around." Gian Chen was extraordinarily intelligent, and the Chongyang Mansion had strict rules regarding statuses. If the fourth master was to be heard saying such words, then it would be sure that the two girls would not be punished lightly. After washing his face, Gian Chen departed from his room and walked toward his mother's room as usual. The distance between the two wasn't far. It was only 20 meters away from his own room. Shortly after entering the room, Gian Chen saw his mother at the dressing table putting on makeup with the help of her own two servant girls standing next to her. "Changyang, you're here earlier than usual today." With a glance at Gian Chen, a gentle smile full of love and adoration could be seen. Seeing that expression of love on her face, Gian Chen's own heart became soft. In his previous world, Gian Chen had lost both parents when he was small, and thus had never known about motherly love, or even experienced it. But when he had came to this world, he had clearly felt the power of this motherly love. And so because of that, he had started to treasure this feeling of love slowly, over time. Gian Chen walked up to the side of his mother and rubbed his stomach and said with an embarrassed laugh, "Your son is hungry." After the rigorous exercise from last night, he had been feeling the slight pangs of hunger. Yuntian placed a gentle hand on top of Gian Chen's head and laughed. "Then in a moment, mother will take you to the dining hall to eat." "Yay!" Gian Chen nodded his head, a look of satisfaction on his face. In his heart, he secretly enjoyed the loving concern his mother had shown him. Pausing for another second, Gian Chen opened his mouth again. "Mother!" Yuntian looked at Gian Chen warmly and said, "Changyang, if you have something you want to say it." Gian Chen hesitated for a second before recollecting his inner thoughts. Looking at his mother again, he said, "Mother, could you please tell your child what the outside world is like?" Hearing Gian Chen, Yuntian was clearly shocked by his question. Opening her mouth, she asked, "Changyang, could it be you're interested in the outside world?" "Your son is only curious," he answered. Yuntian laughed. "Changyang, the outside world is extremely vast and also extremely complicated. The matters of the outside world could not be made clear through words alone. If you want to learn about it, then it would be best if you went to the library and read a few books on it." Even as she voiced her answer, Yuntian's face had looked a little bit helpless. "But Changyang, you still don't know how to read. Even if you go to the library, you wouldn't be able to read any of the words." "Mother, then why don't we bring some people to teach me how to read?" Gian Chen's voice contained some dissatisfaction. Giggling, Yuntian said, "Changyang, you are only 2 years old. Your mother has never heard or seen a 2-year-old child learn how to read before. Even in the entire Tian Yuan continent, this type of situation has never happened before. Generally speaking, the earliest any child has ever started to learn to read was when they were around 4 to 5 years old." Gian Chen understood instantly. "Mother, your son wants to learn to read. Could you please find some people to try and teach me still?" Yuntian was speechless, but a happy smile crept up on her face nonetheless. "Changyang, learning to read is an exhausting task as well as being extremely boring. You must understand that there are many different words in the continent. This isn't something that can be learned quickly. Are you sure you want to start learning now?" Gian Chen nodded his head in confirmation. "I am." Hearing Gian Chen's answer, Yuntian's smile became even more splendid. With a happy laugh, she said, If this is what Xiang'er's request is, then Mother will support you entirely. Turning her head, she called out, Xiao Liu, in a moment go to Lorry City and hire the most prestigious teacher and bring him to the mansion so he can teach my Xiang'er how to read. Yes, my lady. The servant girl who was combing Yuntian's hair agreed respectfully. Xiang'er, it's been a decent amount of time. Let us go to the dining halls before the both of us starve. The day went by quickly, and when the second day came, the teacher Yuntian had hired arrived at the mansion and began to teach him to read. And so from that moment on, Gian Chen would spend his daytime earnestly studying how to read, since he retained some mental fortitude and knowledge from his memories of the past. Learning the written language of this new world was not all that difficult. Combined with the teacher who was putting his heart and soul in teaching him, as well as his amazing memorization capabilities, learning to read was extremely fast and easy for him. In just a short span of 3 months, he had already mastered the most basic words of the continent. Gian Chen's learning rate had made the teacher exclaim in astonishment. Immediately after Yuntian had learned that he had learned most of the written language in 3 months, she couldn't believe it. In the end, she had put Gian Chen in a test before she could accept the fact. If one wanted to read and write most of the words used in the continent to the extent Gian Chen had, then one needed to spend at least 2 years. To have Gian Chen accomplish this in 3 months while it took most 2 years, not even any of the geniuses could claim to have accomplished this feat. As Gian Chen entered the inner tower, a long and narrow corridor greeted his eyes. It was daytime on the outside, and light shined down beautifully, leaving a sight like none other. On the walls of the corridor, a bright moon pearl was hung and gave off a light to illuminate the hallway. The length of the corridor was quite long, before finally splitting into 2 paths. Gian Chen estimated that both paths followed the opposite sides of the tower, before finally rejoining again after a distance. Fourth Master, the clan leader has said you have the authority to access the left side of the tower. An elderly voice called out. Coming out from the shadows, slowly, was a tall figure. Gian Chen turned around after hearing this. Although the light in this part of the tower was dim, he could clearly make out the appearance of the figure in the midst of the shadows. It was an elderly figure with white hair and wrinkles all over. Wearing a silver Chang Pao that was devoid of any other colors, even still he was relatively normal-looking. No one would suspect he wasn't anything more than an ordinary elderly man. No matter how much Gian Chen looked at the old man, he couldn't see anything but mediocrity. Although he still didn't dare underestimate the old man, it was his inner instincts that told him that this old figure was an expert with extraordinary strength. The strongest man he had seen since he had entered this world was his father Changyang, but it was impossible to measure his father to what Gian Chen was feeling from this old man. Chapter 6. Saint's Test. Although Gian Chen could see through his frail appearance and find the true strength of the old man, he remained motionless and did not reveal anything on his face. With a silent nod to show his thanks, he stepped by the old man and proceeded down the left corridor. Arriving at the end of the corridor, Gian Chen's eyes began to shine brightly as he walked into a large room. The light in this room was exceptionally bright, so much so that it was comparable to the light outside. Many neat and tidy bookshelves that contained thousands of books lined the walls of the library. Gian Chen slowly tilted his head to look at the ceiling. He knew that the reason why the light was so bright was due to the ceiling. He had no idea what material the ceiling was made from, but it was strangely emitting a strong glow. Although the light was somewhat intense, it was not to the point of irritating the eyes. Although the ceiling had piqued his interest, he wasn't willing to squander time by trying to figure it out. Walking up to a bookshelf, he finally grabbed a book and started flipping through it. The book had fairly clear descriptions written inside, despite it not being as thick as the others. It had taken Gian Chen 3 hours to completely read through the book. Because of this, he had finally gained some insights regarding this strange world. This continent was called the Tian Yuan continent and was fairly big. There were numerous countries of various sizes and even more cities of all sizes. The biggest cities were known as the capitals, and each one stretched across countless miles, and each of these capitals were ruled by a city ruler. Each ruler was also in charge of several million up to 10 million guardian soldiers. However, within the entire Tian Yuan continent, there were only 7 capitals, while 3 of the 7 were controlled by a single strong empire. Among the strongest empires were the Karl Empire and the Felicity Empire, who both controlled 2 capitals each. It was the Holy Empire that controlled the first 3 capitals. Under the capitals were the king cities, but the king cities were smaller than the capitals by a huge amount. Practically every kingdom had at the very least 1 king city, and each king city had 1,000,000 guardian soldiers. Under the king cities were the first-class cities, which had 800,000 guardian soldiers. The second-class cities had 400,000 guardian soldiers each. Under the second-class cities were the varying villages, which all had their own guardian soldiers, but their numbers wouldn't reach over 50,000. Even their strength and numbers varied greatly. The Tian Yuan continent had people that all practiced something called the Saint Force. When their Saint Force reached the 10th level, then based on the expert's ideology, the Saint Force will condense into a Saint's weapon. There were over 1,000 shapes, and each were completely dependent on the expert's ideology. As a result of the Saint weapon forming from the Saint Force, once it formed a special link with the expert. Some people with an outstanding gift would receive a Saint weapon with a special attribute. These attributes were classified as earth, wind, water, fire, light, and dark. Among these elements, light and dark were rarely seen, but were still extremely powerful. The light element was extremely strong in the healing aspect, and those who had light-attributed saint weapons were given the title of immortals in the Tian Yuan continent. They were given this title due to the fact that while on the battlefield, they could easily restore any damage taken. On the battlefield, if they were not killed in one strike, then they would be nearly impossible to defeat. Those with the dark element had a corrosive nature. Not only was this a troublesome element, but those with dark attributes were also in demand. At night, they could come and go as they pleased, earning them the titles of Night Lords, for the night was under their command. The rest of the 4 elements each had their own corresponding strengths. The amount of power they had depended on one's own strength and judgment. Of course, in the Tian Yuan continent, those who had a saint weapon with an attribute was 1 in 10, compared to those who didn't have an attribute. On a battlefield, those with an attribute were often harder to fight against than those who didn't. The saint weapons were the strongest of weapons. In a war, saint weapons could be freely summoned at will and provide assistance to their masters to help overcome their limits. At the same time, a saint weapon and its master's life were intertwined. Whatever injury the saint weapon sustained would then be equally reflected back to the master. Also, if the saint weapon ever broke, then the master would receive a fatal wound as well. If the situation was grave, then even a wound may cause death. However, saint weapons were extremely hard to break. As long as the saint weapon was stronger than the opposing force, then it would not be harmed in any way. After a saint weapon takes shape, then this new way of cultivation would absorb the chi from the world to become stronger. This method would improve one's own strength as well. Once the saint weapon was formed, then the expert would be called a saint. In the Tian Yuan continent, the saints are classified into 9 different levels: Saint, Great Saint, Saint Master, Great Saint Master, Earth Saint Master, Heaven Saint Master, Saint Ruler, Saint King, and Saint Emperor. Within each of the levels, they are further separated into 3 levels: lower, middle, and upper. Within the Tian Yuan continent, there lies a mountain range that was spread out across the continent called the Mountain Range of Magical Beasts. The range was filled with countless magical beasts. The further you went in, the stronger the beasts would get. These magical beasts were also separated into 9 levels. The Class 1 beasts were equivalent to a saint, while the Class 2 beasts was equivalent to a great saint. Continuing on with this, a Class 8 beast was on par with a Saint King, and finally, a Class 9 beast was equivalent to a Saint Emperor. At the same time, the Tian Yuan continent had a very prominent profession called the mercenary. According to this book, the Tian Yuan continent had many mercenaries. These mercenaries would accomplish a variety of tasks for money, although many mercenaries would enter the mountain range of magical beasts to hunt monsters and sell the monster cores for money. Although the dangers were big, the rewards were just as generous due to monster cores being highly valued in the continent. The higher grade a monster core was, the higher priced it was. There were some high-ranked monster cores that could not be bought with money alone. Monster cores were one of the most desired items in the continent. Inside the center of a monster core was a large amount of pure energy and could be absorbed by humans for a faster training speed. Absorbing the energy from a monster core was ultimately faster than trying to absorb the world essence into one's body. However, using the monster cores to increase the cultivation speed wasn't a method the general populace could do without having plenty of money. Other than a few odd things, Gian Chen was finally beginning to understand many things about this world. This world was exceptionally cruel, and wars happened everywhere. The people of this world were more dangerous in comparison to his old world. If one wasn't strong enough, then they would find it hard to survive. Most of the people on the continent were practitioners as well, although the average practitioner would be of average strength. The average person wouldn't be able to cultivate their saint force to the 10th level and be able to condense it into a saint's weapon. If these people don't have the proper training and support, then they would remain at the lowest levels, similar to a peasant in the mountains. After finishing the books, Gian Chen finally understood the new world to a better degree. Saint weapons, elements and attributes, magical beasts, monster cores, and mercenaries, everything was a new experience to Gian Chen that gave his heart a thrill. He was looking forward to the new world and desperately wished to leave the Chongyang Mansion immediately. To be able to experience the outside world would be a refreshing change of pace. However, Gian Chen knew that he would not be able to fulfill his desires in the upcoming years. His parents would never allow a 3-year-old child to leave their home for the outside world. Even if he could leave his home, he would have no way of defending himself. After a long period of time, Gian Chen decided to put even more effort into his training. Aside from his daily meals, every day was spent training alone within his room. He still hadn't completed the basics of the cultivation stage of Azulate Sword Law, so the world essence he had been absorbing was distributed equally throughout his body, entering each cell and strengthening his body. It was only when his body could no longer be strengthened by the world essence would Gian Chen be able to break through to the second stage, where he would start the formal training of his true qi. Currently, Gian Chen still had the physique far beyond that of a normal person. However, some regions of his body where qi previously gathered in his past world were still empty. In his previous world, Gian Chen had managed to finish the cultivation stage within a single year. Since this world essence was stronger by at least twofold, even though it was taking him more than 2 years to make a breakthrough, his body was getting stronger and stronger, giving his current body the potential to be even stronger than his previous body. Although Gian Chen normally spent the entire day hiding in his room to cultivate, neither of his parents had outwardly expressed any sort of bafflement or concern. The reason for this was because in the Chongyang Mansion, the parents would generally teach the children a method of breathing and let them train for a year. By the 3rd year, these children would take a test to see how strong their saint power was and evaluate their potential as well as their aptitude. When Gian Chen was 2 years old, Yuntian had taught him the same breathing method as the other children had learned. However, Gian Chen had taken this breathing exercise and tossed it into the depths of his mind, for Gian Chen had felt that this sort of training was like giving an adult a child's toy to play with. As a result, Gian Chen had locked himself in his room. People passing by had only thought that Gian Chen was practicing the breathing method and paid no attention to him. The following morning, Gian Chen had finally finished last night's cultivation exercise. Today was a special day for him, since it was his 3rd birthday. At the same time, today would be the day that he would undergo the very same test as any other 3-year-old in the Tian Yuan continent, the Saints test. Accompanying his mother Yuntian to the dining halls, Gian Chen was then later taken to the Changyang clan's official main hall. The Chongyang Mansion covered a large amount of area, and compared to the area Gian Chen was used to, he had only experienced a small portion of the land. Walking along the road, Gian Chen looked at the mansion without stopping. In his first 3 years, Gian Chen had spent the vast majority of his time within his own room and cultivated. Very rarely did he stroll around the mansion. Within the Chongyang Mansion, a large group of uniformed patrolmen were walking around the area. Many sharp eyes were staring all around from hidden areas, and despite it being the daytime, they still did not show the slightest sense of relaxation. As Gian Chen walked past a series of training grounds, a young but soft shout had gotten his attention from the inside. A mere glance inside would show a small group of 10-year-olds being taught some martial art drills by a middle-aged man. Gian Chen understood in his heart that these children were disciples born directly into the family line. The Chongyang clan had about 1,000 clansmen. Although half of them were guardsmen and servants, the other half were members that were born from within the clan line. Walking past the training grounds, Yuntian led her son to the middle of an official-looking hallway. This was where Gian Chen would undergo the saint's test.